Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. This review is going to include some spoilers, and I'm aware that with spoilers of these kind of films, they're very much frowned upon for anyone who hasn't seen them. So I just wanted to say that now, because of course, if you haven't seen the film yet, you want to go in with a blank slate, please do go in and experience it. You know, it's the same with any film, going and experiencing it, not knowing anything about what's going to happen. I'd say I am an average Star Wars fan. I'm not a hardcore Star Wars fan. I've pretty much at least liked all the films up until this point. Of course, the original trilogy, episodes 4 to 6, are those films that have been very well known as being masterpieces, particularly The Empire Strikes Back, episode 5. That was, of course, has been noticed as probably the best Star Wars film ever made. In all honesty, I haven't watched those films over and over again. I remember watching them when I was young and really enjoying them. The prequel trilogy, of course, has its probably are the films that are more problematic particularly for hardcore Star Wars fans. I remember the Phantom Menace coming out when I was a kid, and I loved it. It is very much a child-friendly Star Wars film. It's not a particularly great film by any means, but I do have nostalgic fondness of the Phantom Menace, and everyone knows the Darth Maul scene is probably the best scene of the whole film. The Attack of the Clones I watched again recently, actually, and again I remember liking that when I was younger. And as I've gotten older, I see how problematic that film really is. There are some really bad scenes in it, but again, I have a fondness for that film simply because of the age I was then, and I still stand by the fact that Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, is pretty well made Star Wars film. Again, it's flawed, you know, there's a lot of films that are flawed, and out of that entire trilogy, I think Revenge of the Sith had more interesting stuff going on for it. Now, of course, we have the new trilogy. The Force Awakens came a couple of years ago, and I really loved that film. I thought it was a really great reboot for the saga. I loved pretty much everything about it. I thought it was a really great, exciting piece of filmmaking. And we had Rogue One last year. I thought it was an okay film, but there was nothing about it that particularly astounding film. I know it was for a lot of hardcore Star Wars fans. My friend Alex, who runs this channel as well, and my friend Luke, they both have their opinions about this new film as well. And Alex is, of course, a massive fan of the original Star Wars trilogy. He's a really hardcore Star Wars fan. We haven't spoken much about the prequel trilogy. I think it's one of those things that's kind of unspoken about. And the new trilogy, let's just say he's not a fan of. He does really have his reservations about these new films, but he did love Rogue One, whereas I thought Rogue One was okay, and I loved Force Awakens. He hated Force Awakens and loved Rogue One. So we had differing opinions about the last two Star Wars films already before going in to see this new episode. You can see it's very clearly it's a very well-made film. Of course it is. It's a Star Wars film. They put their all into it production-wise. It's astounding. There's some really beautiful-looking scenery in it, and some beautiful, quite beautiful moments, actually, the more I think about it. So The Last Jedi, I think it's going to cause diverse opinions. It's going to cause a lot of discussion, as all Star Wars films do, and I think that in itself is reason for it to be an interesting cinema experience, as that is going to cause discussion after you've seen it. I kind of want to start chronologically with the film, because I think a lot of the film, I'm going to say straight off, a lot of the film I wasn't particularly excited about. I wasn't thrilled about it when I came out of the cinema. I don't know if that was just disappointment from the overhype about the film. However, there's no doubt that this film still includes some really exciting scenes, and some scenes that throughout the year, really, in terms of cinema, that I have been genuinely excited after seeing. Like, after the scene finishes, you just think, whoa, that was great. So of course the opening scroll sequence with the music by John Williams is just still one of the most thrilling cinema experiences you can ever have. The music is so powerful and the feeling of a new Star Wars film is really incredible. So you can't really beat that in itself. Also, I think the big thing about the film, it's not the way it's made, it's not the acting or anything, because the acting's really good, of course, you know. But I think it's always the story and the character arcs that are what make it for hardcore Star Wars fans. And there's a lot about the film that I don't necessarily find that exciting. For example, when you first see Luke Skywalker in the film, who is the best thing about the film, I think, ultimately. But when you first meet him, for some reason, there isn't that feeling of, oh, you know, God, it's Luke Skywalker. And for such an iconic film character, it's a strange feeling when he's finally back on screen to kind of feel like, oh, okay, it's Luke Skywalker, you know. So I can't really explain why. It's been a few days since I've seen the film, and I still can't explain fully why that is the case. With that in mind, I think Luke Skywalker, played by Mark Hamill, is brilliant in this film, and I think his storyline is the most interesting. Just to see where it goes. And of course, like I said, there's going to be spoilers. There is this scene with Master Yoda it really feels like the original trilogy, and it's beautifully done because Yoda is also a puppet in the film. That's how they made him a puppet rather than the CGI that was used in the prequel trilogy, and that feels really authentic, and it feels really it just feels like a really nice nod to the original trilogy and the roots of Star Wars, and it feels great when those two characters are back on screen together. In the very first act of the film, there's a scene with Leia, which you'll know what scene it is when you go and see it, but there's a scene with Leia that is quite strange and out of the blue, and it's beautifully filmed. It's a really and the music behind it is beautiful as well, and that's the first thing I thought about the scene. But when you see what actually happens in the scene, it's very confusing, and it's just kind of a strange and unexplained thing that happens in the film, and I think that's the main flaw of the film, is that there are some plot holes going on. Snoke, played greatly by Andy Serkis, again, great character, but his story kind of finishes about halfway through the film, and again, there's not much that is explained about him. He kind of has a cameo role in The Force Awakens, and he has a bigger part in this film, but again, there's not really much that's explained about why he's here, why. And there's still elements about his character that I enjoy, like I think Andy Serkis plays him really well. He's a really menacing, evil character, and you really get the sense of that in this film. I think with the characters of Rey, played by Daisy Ridley, for some reason I'm not as interested in their story in this film, whereas in The Force Awakens I was really captivated by her character and really interested to see where her story goes along, and she was just a really fascinating film character. Whereas in this one, I didn't really, for some reason, I wasn't as interested seeing where her character's going to end up. I think I was more interested in seeing Luke Skywalker's, the continuation of his character. I did get why people might be disappointed by it. I completely understood that. I also completely understand, after seeing it a few days, why people love it, because it has some really exciting moments in it, and stuff that will stay with me for a while. I think the only moment I really gasped at was when Adrian Edmondson appeared on screen. I thought that was really bizarre, and I just remember turning to my friend Mitch and going, "Oh, it's Adrian Edmondson! Jesus!" Because I'm, a massive fan of Bottom and other work he's done in the past, and to see him in a Star Wars film is really quite something. Another exciting moment, I think, is in the final act of the film when Luke Skywalker faces Kylo Ren. I think that scene's really exciting, and I felt quite on the edge of my seat watching that scene, actually. And the whole part with him just brushing his shoulder off after being shot at is just one of the most badass things in cinema history. I think it's really, really well done. So I do have mixed feelings about the film. I think overall, having given it a few days after I've seen it, I think I liked it. I did like it. It's one of those films, it did feel over long for me, but I think that's because a lot of the film, really, while I was experiencing it, I wasn't completely captivated by, and it was just individual scenes here and there that I really liked. But I think that's reason to like the film enough, is that it did have a few scenes in it that genuinely got me on the edge of my seat and were exciting and really well done. I think Kylo Ren, played by Adam Driver, is a genuinely interesting character, and again, I wasn't as interested in his character as this one, which is strange because he's got more character development in this film than the last one. I think he's a very conflicted character. It's a film that's really worth seeing for any Star Wars fan. Of course, everyone's probably going to have gone to the midnight showing for it. I think out of these new Star Wars films, The Force Awakens remains my favourite so far. However, The Last Jedi is a decent film. And to be honest, it includes scenes that have excited me more than some films this year that I've watched the whole of and not been excited once throughout the film. So just for that, in general, it's worth seeing.